Hey everyone, welcome to the last video in this series, right? Breaks my heart too. Um, this series, we've covered a lot of topics. We've covered how to use the grid layout, Flexbox, how to create breakpoints using media queries, how to make flexible type that's going to grow and shrink as the screen gets bigger and smaller. We've talked about new technologies like Clamp. We've done a whole lot of stuff, including making responsive images. And we put it all together in one web page. This doesn't by any means cover every single topic that you'd need to know to make a fully responsive website, but it's really a great stepping off point. What I want to do in this video is just review the code from all of these putting it together videos. Make sure that you have everything the way I had it, and just a quick review on some of those main key points. So let's get started with the HTML. So for starters, what we have here is we always start with the HTML doc type declaration telling it's HTML5 and our root element HTML. In the head, I chose to use some Google fonts. So these right here are the links to the Google fonts, right? I've got two links to style sheets, one for Normalize, and you may recall that Normalize is a style sheet that was not created by me, but it is used to make sure that every page that is created looks the same on all browsers. It normalizes, if you will, some elements that are not the same between Firefox, Chrome, and Edge. Then I've got my style sheet right here. Okay, it's called Style CSS. Let's look at the body. I'm using a grid-based layout, so I'm using CSS Grid. And to do that, remember, you've got a relationship between a container and all of its children. The container gets the grid, display grid applied to it, and then all the children align according to those rules that you set up for that grid. So I've got a div called class grid container that opens right at the top of the body. And if we scroll down to the bottom, it closes right before the end of the body. This is our wrapper. It wraps everything up. It's going to contain everything in the entire page. Okay? First thing I have in here is my header, and I've got the usual HTML structure of header, nav, and then content. And in my content here, I've got a feature section, and then I've got two other sections that will work as columns in some size viewports, and then they'll stack vertically in other viewports. So get my header with a logo image in it, a nav UL, series of LIs with links, and this is what we have been doing as long as we've been doing multi-page websites in my videos. It's always this structure. Next, I have my section called feature. So section class feature, it has a figure in it, and in that figure, I've got a fig caption and I've got an image. And you may recall from the previous video, this image is a responsive image. I am offering up an array of images here. Each one of these is a different file with their sizes specified. Remember, the 250W tells you how many pixels wide it is, and each of these has a size specified. So what the browser does is it's going to look at how I've set up the sizes here, and it's going to choose the most appropriate size image for the given image container size. Okay? So source set, you do an array of images that you want to possibly load, and for sizes, you set up a series of rules where you have breakpoints, and then you have image container sizes. Okay? And then I've got my alt text. Inside of my feature, I also have feature text, which has an H2 and a paragraph. And you might recall that at larger sizes, at my two larger breakpoints, I've got the feature text sitting side by side with the image, but then at the smallest breakpoint, it stacks vertically. So that's my section class feature. and the section closes right down here below the feature text div. Okay, let's move on. Then I've got two main content containers. I've got one called main class, main content, and then I've got another one called aside class, side content. Instead of using divs, I chose to use the elements main and aside for my two columns. You can think of main as being the main content that people go to the website to view, and the aside is going to be things like maybe there's an image gallery, or maybe there's like a top 10 series of posts or things like that. That's what you can use the aside for. It's side content or ancillary content. In my main content, I've got an article, an H2, a series of paragraphs. I've got a block quote. This is nothing different than anything we've ever done in all of the videos you've watched. Okay? Article, H2, series of paragraphs, and whatever content you need. Maybe there's tables in there, maybe there's images in there, maybe there's lists, whatever content that you need to put in that article. It just means everything in that article is related to the same topic. So in here, I just put one article. Inside content, I've got an article in H2, and then I've got a figure. That figure has a fig caption and another responsive image. Once again, I used source set, where I set up a series of images with their widths applied to them, and then I give a couple of rules for how the browser is going to choose which image to serve. It's going to look at this breakpoint, and then the size of the image container for that breakpoint, and it's going to choose the most appropriate image for that image box size. Okay, so for the 500 pixel box size, it's probably going to choose a 500 pixel size image. If it gets to 100 VW minus 6 rem, and that size is bigger than 500, it's going to choose to serve the 1000 pixel wide image. So that's responsive images. And the rest of this article is just a series of paragraphs. Okay? And then I've got my footer down at the bottom. So quick review. I've got my div class container, which wraps up everything. I've got my header with an image. I've got my nav with a series of LIs and a UL. I've got my feature with a figure and a responsive image with a fig caption. I've got, my lights just fell off or turned off. I'm going to leave it. I've got a div called feature text with an H2 and a paragraph. And then I've got my main content and side content. Right? Make sure that you have all that HTML for your template as well. Let's look at the CSS. At the top, I've got my typographic styles. And this is where I set up a responsive type hierarchy, where I'm using clamp and I'm using custom properties to set small, base, medium, large, XL, double XL, and triple XL font sizes. And clamp is going to allow those to grow and shrink up to a maximum and down to a minimum. So this gives us that fluid type that as we scale up and scale down, the type will get bigger and smaller. It's responsive. It's responding to the size of the viewport. And then I'm going to apply the font family. This is my Google font, Calistoga, for all of my H's. And then my font family, Montserrat, for my paragraph, figure, fig caption, block quote, and A. And now here is where I'm using those custom properties to set the font sizes. Excuse me. So double check all of your CSS and make sure that yours matches so that you have a functioning template like mine. All right, there's the CSS for the typography. Let's take a look at the styles for the page structure. I just gave the background color for the body black. That's all I did for the body. I didn't do anything else. Here is my big mover for everything that's going to take place in terms of arrangement of things in the frame. I'm getting my grid container and I'm displaying it as a grid. And you may recall that we used grid template areas. This is not the only way to set up a layout using grid. There are all kinds of ways. We explored many of those in previous videos. I chose grid template areas for this because I think it's very easy to do and it's easy to make responsive. I set the grid template columns to 5 columns with 1 fractional unit each, so they're all going to be proportionate. You could do this with a series of M's if you wanted instead of fractional units. I chose fractional units. I gave it a grid gap of 2 rem, so that between each of my components there will be a 2 rem gap. I set the width using clamp so that it's going to be a minimum of 20 rem and a maximum of 75 rem. I did not want that grid container to get too small or too large. If it ever gets too large, the layout just kind of breaks, your line lengths get too long. If it gets too small, then the line lengths get too short, things look cramped, and it looks just bad. And then it's got a desired size, which would be 100% the view width minus 6 rem. I chose to subtract the 6 rem for it because I'm adding 6 rem on to padding. So it's going to go up to, it's going to desire to be the full width of the screen. If it ever gets too wide, the screen will get wider, but the page, the layout won't. And if it gets too narrow, it will always stay the maximum size of the screen until it gets down to 20 rem, and at which point you would get some scroll bars. You shouldn't ever get down below 20 rem though. I set the margins to 0 and auto so that as the screen gets bigger and the screen goes beyond the max width, your design will sit in the middle of the web page. Gave it some padding, set the background color of the grid container to ivory. Okay, make sure you have all this. Let's look at some of the stuff for the nav. Not much is going on with the nav. I just set the list style to none, and the nav UL LIs, I gave them a margin of 3 rem on the left and right, so they're spaced out just a little bit. The header, not much going on here. I flexed the header, I justified the content to center so that at the smallest sizes, remember this is my default style, at the smallest sizes, the image in the header is going to sit in the middle. It's not going to sit onto the left or to the right. Okay. Now, here we're starting to see grid areas named. Okay. So remember, when we do grid template areas, we set up a layout for all of our named areas. I've named them header, nav, feature, main, side, and footer. Here's where that all starts. And you do that with grid area. I called it header. I displayed it flex. Nav, I didn't do any styles with it here for the default style. I just named it grid area nav. Feature, I named it grid area feature, and I gave it a maximum width. I didn't want it to get any wider than making the line length of the feature text 75 characters. I don't want that line length to get wider than 75 characters, and I didn't want it to get narrower than 35 characters. I set the margins to auto so that if it is narrower than the width of its container, it sits in the center of its container. Feature text, I also set a clamp on it. I gave it a minimum of 35 characters, a maximum of 75 characters. Like we said before, that's kind of the range of the desired line lengths. Anything in between those line lengths are going to be very readable. If they get too long, bigger than 75 characters wide, or narrower than 35, it becomes harder to read, or it just looks awkward. I set the desired size to be the view width minus 6 rem. That 6 rem is accounting for the padding in the grid container. Main content, I made sure to name it grid area main. I gave it a max width of 75 characters, and then I set the margins to 0 auto. And then my side content, I did the same thing, but I named it side. Footer, I just named it footer. I didn't do anything to the footer. I didn't need to for this. And then for my images, I always set the max width to 100%. That ensures that they won't break out of their containers if the image is larger than the containers. So we're setting it a max width of 100. Now here we get to our media queries and our breakpoints. This is part of the responsive design. It goes right here. So I chose 2 breakpoints, one at 48 rem and one at 64 rem. So when the screen size gets larger than 48 rem, we're going to respond. The grid template areas don't change at 48 rem, but the nav then gets flexed. It's going to be a horizontal layout at that point. So our nav items sit side by side, and they're going to sit in the center of the screen. The feature is also going to flex so that my figure and fig caption and image and feature text sit side by side. And the feature text gets clamped. It makes sure that it doesn't get narrower than 35, wider than 75 characters, and it's going to try and be 100% of its container. Now, how is this different how I clamped it before? Before I clamped it at view width 100%. So it's looking at the size of the browser window, and it's going to try and set it to 100% of the browser window width. Well, why is that different here? This is saying 100% too. The 100% when using a percentage is setting it to 100% of its container. So the container might be smaller. The usable width of the container might be smaller than 100% width of the viewport. It makes a huge difference. Let's take a look at the breakpoint for 64 rem now. Here is where I break to a multi-column layout. Okay. So header is still all the way across, nav is all the way across, feature is all the way across. Now main takes up 3 columns and side takes up 2 columns. And then I've got my footer all the way across. So this is one of my responsive things. It goes from a single column layout at smaller sizes to a multi-column layout at wider sizes. I move the header to flex start. That's going to take the header logo image out of the center and put it to the left side, and then it's going to take the links in the navigation and put it to flex end, where it puts it to the right side. Let's just really quickly review how this looks in the browser. I'm going to open it in Firefox. And let's see how it responds. Here we have our full width, not now. Here we have our full width web page. You can see that the feature image is taking up 1,000, it's using the 1,000 pixel image. So is the aside content. You can see that the feature is side by side, the links are to the right side, the logo's on the left side, and you can see I've got 2 columns, okay? I'm going to inspect. And watch how things change as we shrink. Keep watching this value here. This is our width, our pixel width. Once we hit our breakpoints, you'll see some changes. We already saw the image change from 1,000 pixel image to a 500 pixel image. You can see the font size changing just a little bit. You saw that breakpoint there where the logo goes to the center, okay? You can also see how it will go from a 2 column to a 1 column, okay? Then we get down to the smallest size breakpoint when we get down below 768, and boom, it breaks to a single column for our feature text and our feature image. And you can see the text continue to get smaller. And you'll notice that it does not allow the text to get narrower than that smallest size that I used for the clamp. And it doesn't get any wider than the 75 characters. Well, there you have it. This is our responsive web page. Once again, this is not a fully designed web page. It's a good jumping off point. This is not everything that you need to know about responsive design, but it's a really good start with all of the fundamental things that you need to know. I hope you enjoyed this series. I hope you learned a ton, and I hope you use this as a starting point in your journey for making responsive websites. Thanks for tuning in to all these videos. I appreciate your support.